Chapter 3 Attached. G'day everyone, Rune here, and this is Chapter 3 of my What If Light Became a Nobody story. If you're new to this story, click the link in the description below to be taken to the playlist. Now let's begin the next chapter. Where did you wander off to, Ryuk? The tall Shinigami chuckles as he emerges from the wall, telling the young preteen that he'd spotted something interesting and had gone for a closer look. The boy narrows his eyes at him, asking if the Shinigami is going to share this interesting discovery, even if he already knows the answer. Ryuk snickers, asking the boy why he would do that. After all, he never told Light anything, so why would he tell anything to him? The boy scowls, his sapphire blue eyes turning hard and cold as he pushes his long black hair out of his eyes. The expression is very out of place on his preteen face, causing it to have none of the impact that it had once had on Light's. The boy seems to realize this too, as he turns away from Ryuk with an irritated tisk, turning back to the task he'd been doing before Ryuk arrived. The desk, which had once been covered in figurines of characters from various anime and piles of manga, has almost been completely cleared. Grinning to himself, Ryuk picks up one of the figurines that still remain.
I'm impressed that you found somewhere to put these. Unless you just threw them in the trash.
Believe me, if that were an option, I most certainly would. But such an out-of-character act would only raise suspicion. I need all the time I can get if I'm going to get back what I lost. Ryuk snickers and places the figurine back on the desk. He has always known that Light is an interesting human, but now, things are becoming even more interesting than he thought possible. Ryuk vaguely remembers the days before the world split apart, but never had he thought that the day would come when this world would once again connect to the others. Though, if any human would manage to pull it off, he's not surprised that it was Light. And now he gets front row seats to what happens next. Now the only question is, who should he focus on following? The not quite a preteen stumbling around in the dark trying to find its missing part? Or the mini nobody who has just revealed itself to be an actor in this little drama? Decisions. Meanwhile, in Twilight Town, Tilks is making his way to the top of the clock tower once more, a stick of sea salt ice cream in his hand. As he rounds the corner to the viewing area he'd sat on with Roxas and Shion, he sees that the two are already there. Seeming to sense his presence, the two wave him over with soft, welcoming smiles. Lips twitching into what might have been the ghost of a smile, he makes his way over, taking a seat next to Shion. Once he's seated, the three begin to talk about the missions that they'd been sent on today. Though Roxas and Shion are mostly interested in how Tilks' first Recon mission went. When they've run out of things to say, they simply sit there, watching as the sun slowly sets behind the mountains that surround the town. Until Tilks breaks the silence with a random thought. The naming convention makes no sense. What? The naming convention. Heartless and Nobodies. It makes no sense. Roxas and Shion watch in confused amusement as Tilks begins to ramble about how the names should be the other way around. And who is it that came up with these names? It all makes him sound like a nerd ranting about a jump the shark moment in his favorite show, despite his monotone voice and only subtle facial expressions. It is quite fun to watch and listen to. Once he's finished, Roxas wonders aloud who did come up with the names of Heartless and Nobodies. He doesn't know anything about the history of Nobodies outside of the organization, and even then, he doesn't actually know that much. There's so much they don't know. Shion smiles and suggests that maybe they could figure it out together. All too soon, it's time for them to head back. The next day, Tilks finds that he's been assigned another Recon mission. But this time, instead of it being with Xigbar, it's instead with Demyx. The pompadour-sporting teen whines dramatically about getting stuck with babysitting duty, the hamminess of his performance making it clear that he's not actually being serious. Hearing this, Xigbar, who'd been walking past, gives him a light shove. Grinning, he tells Demyx to stop complaining as Shortstack has a real knack for Recon. He even suggests that Tilks might be better at it than Demyx. Demix turns back to Tilks with a grin and a comment about this being something he needs to see. The moment is cut short by Sykes. With a scale even deeper than normal, he tells the three that they have jobs to do and to get moving. Holding up his hands in mock surrender, Xigbar opens his own portal and walks through, leaving Demix and Tilks to take the one that Sykes opens a few seconds later. Walking through the portal, the two boys find themselves in a massive green jungle. Everything is lush, green, and beautiful, and Tilks can make out several different varieties of flower and plant. He turns to Demix as he grins at him. "Okay, Tilks, show me what you got." Tilks simply nods and moves to the closest plant, which is the tall tree. Looking it up and down, he feels something click at the back of his mind. He knows exactly what plant this is. It's a bulbous tree, a massive tree native to Madagascar, Africa, and Australia that can live for up to 5,000 years and can have a circumference of 30 meters. The next plant he moves to is a flower. It has large purple petals that surround a long stem that has the appearance of a small white flower. He recognizes this one too. It's called bougainville. It's a tropical flower that's primarily found in southern Africa. He wonders just how he can know things like this, yet not even remember the name he'd once had before he became a nobody. Did his old self really like plants? Was this the world that he came from? No, that doesn't seem likely to him for some reason. But it did give him an idea of what kind of world they're currently in. An African rainforest. He continues to look at the vast selection of plants around them before moving on to a new area of the forest. As they walk, the sound of waves reach his ears, indicating that they're near the coast. So it's a coastal rainforest. Tugging on Demix's sleeve, he points out the noise and suggests that they follow it to the coast to get a better idea of the terrain. Nodding in agreement, the two follow the sound of crashing waves to something that neither of them were expecting. They emerge from the trees on a cliff face, with the ocean far below. That part isn't surprising. What does surprise them is the wooden rope bridge connecting the cliffs to a small island where a massive tree is growing. In the tree sits a tree house, and not the small kind that you'd see in the backyard of a kid's home. A full-fledged, people can actually live in this thing, tree house. Tilk steps forward to examine the bridge. From just a glance, he can see a massive variation in the bridge's structure and materials. The rope and some of the wooden planks, which make the bridge, look new. However, the stumps that the ropes are tied to and some of the planks look like they've been petrified, indicating that they've been there for years. He looks up the treehouse. It's pretty far away, but if he squints, he thinks he can make out some small wisps of smoke coming from the chimney. This house definitely has people living in it. And if the bridge is any indication, they've either been living here for a long time or found this place after the old owner left and decided to claim finders keepers. He turns to Demix, who's currently squinting at the house himself, the look on his face clearly conveying his thoughts of, what the heck? Tilks pokes his arm to get his attention and tells him about the recent repairs to the bridge and the wisp of smoke coming from the house. Hearing this, Demix goes rigid before he picks Tilks up under his arm and briskly marches back into the forest. Awkwardly looking up at the older teen from his position, he questions exactly why that was necessary. In response, Demix flips him right way up and sets him back on the ground, before explaining to his junior that being seen by somebodies is generally something to avoid. Nobodies, especially nobodies like them, aren't even supposed to exist. As such, their existence is something that's easily forgotten about by somebodies. As such, Xemnas doesn't want any of the members interacting with somebodies any more than necessary. He tells Tilks to avoid letting somebody see him as much as possible, and to never make an impression that would make him stick in their mind. Even as Tilks nods in understanding, he can't help but notice the holes in that logic. If nobodies are so swiftly forgotten, then why would it matter if they're seen by somebodies? They'd just be forgotten anyway. It's not like they can get attached to a somebody without a heart. And even if they could, the fact that they spend enough time around them to get attached would mean that the somebody remembers them, wouldn't it? But at the same time, it does kind of make sense to avoid somebodies while on the job, since they could get hurt if a fight with Heartless started up. It's a weird kind of logic that makes sense at a glance, but once you really look at it, starts to fall apart. Still, he'll do as he's told and avoid being seen. He really doesn't want to get on Xemnas' bad side. If he can make someone like Sykes do as he says, he's not someone that Tilks wants to mess with. Later that evening, Tilks walks toward the mission room, looking for Roxas and Shion, as neither of them had shown up at the clock tower and he wants to know where they were. Not because he's worried. He's only known them for 2 days. It makes no sense for him to be worried. The unpleasant twinging in his stomach is just indigestion. As he approaches the archway to the room, he spots Sykes and Zigbar coming out. The air around them seems to be thick with tension, making Tilks want to turn the other direction. Before he can even begin to act on the impulse, he spots Roxas standing just inside the room, head down and shoulders slumped. Ignoring the sudden spike to his indigestion, he quickly walks over to the blonde. After tugging on his sleeve to get his attention, he asks why Roxas looks so sad. Roxas looks torn for a few seconds, as if he's debating whether to tell Tilks or to keep it to himself before he heaves a sigh. He asks if Tilks remembers the friend that he told him about. Tilks nods, remembering that the guy's name is Axel. Roxas nods before sighing again. He explains to his younger friend that everyone at Castle Oblivion has gone missing. There's been no word from any of them, including Axel. Sykes says that he may have vanished for good. Tilks doesn't like the expression on Roxas's face. It looks so sad and hopeless. He doesn't want Roxas to look like that. Reaching out, he gives Roxas's hand a light squeeze, making the blonde look at him. He tells him not to give up hope just yet. Just because no one's heard from him yet doesn't mean that he's gone. Axel could just be lying low. Or maybe he broke whatever it was he was using to communicate with the organization. Roxas gives a small smile, his expression shifting to one of gratitude. Reaching up, he gently ruffles Tilks' hair before apologizing for not being at the clock tower today. He promises that he'll be there tomorrow. The next day, Tilks finds himself on a mission with Shion, which is a very pleasant surprise. They're sent to a world called Naboombu to gather materials that Vexen supposedly needs for a project. While there, they find that the whole island is inhabited solely by anthropomorphized animals. One of them keeps roaring at one thing or another, nearly frightening the two out of their skin every time. Tilks also manages to get a new summon, and his first boss summon at that. During their time gathering the materials they need, they get attacked by a large heartless that takes the form of an hourglass. While it's not very strong in terms of attack or defense, it's still a problem due to its power to slow them down and speed itself up. Despite how much trouble the Heartless is, Tilks is more than happy to add it to his roster, already thinking of all the different applications of time manipulation. Finally gathering what they need, the duo make their way back to the portal on the beach. Before going in, however, Shion stops and crouches down. Confused, Tilks walks over to her to see what she's doing and sees her picking up some beautifully coloured shells. Noticing him watching, she explains that she's been collecting shells from her missions. Tilks' eyes widen slightly, suddenly looking very interested. And you haven't gotten in trouble? For taking something that has nothing to do with the mission? Shion shakes her head. As long as we finish the mission, I don't see how they'd have a problem with it. Tilks nods before turning on his heel and running back into the forest that makes up the majority of the island, calling over his shoulder that he'll be right back. A few minutes later, he comes running back, his hands full of flowers. Curious, Shion asks about them. Tilks explains about his mission to Deep Jungle with Demix and how he'd recognized the plant life there, but he doesn't recognize these ones. He remembers seeing a bookshop in Twilight Town, so maybe they can stop there to look for a book on plants before meeting up with Roxas at the clock tower? Maybe they can also find a book on shell accessories for Shion. Shion smiles, her chest feeling warm at Tilks taking such an interest in something. She tells him that they'll go right now before heading back to the castle. That way they can drop everything off at once and won't have to carry the books to the clock tower. Tilks nods, his lips twitching upwards for half a second. Later, the two walk down the halls of the castle, their arms full of shopping bags containing not only the books they'd originally gone looking for, but wire, thread, resin, toothpicks, foam, and everything else that the two had discovered that they would need in order to fully delve into their new hobbies. They've already dropped off the materials that Vexen wanted, and now all they need to do is drop off their shopping in their rooms and they can go meet Roxas at the clock tower. As they're approaching the living quarters, however, they spot Xemnas and Sykes walking towards them. Tilk stiffens, shifting slightly towards Shion as they approach. Noticing this, Shion shifts closer and a little in front of Tilk's, slightly shielding him from the two men. When Xemnas and Sykes are right in front of them, Sykes asks if they're here to see Roxas. Confused, Shion asks what he means.
Oh, you haven't heard? Roxas is currently in a deep sleep. It is currently unknown if he'll wake up.
Without waiting for a response, Sykes and Xemnas walk away, leaving Tilks and Shion to stare at each other, eyes wide. Without hesitation, they run down the hall to Roxas's room and stumble inside. There, lying silently on the bed, is Roxas. Tilks stares at Roxas's prone form, not even noticing that he's dropped his bags as well as the flowers he'd been holding. Slowly, he makes his way over to Roxas. He falls to his knees next to the bed, asking the blonde to open his eyes. Shion comes up behind him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder.
It'll be okay, Tilks. He'll wake up. You'll see.
And that, everyone, is where I'm going to leave the story for now. Join me next time as Tilks and Shion grow closer while struggling to deal with Roxas's coma. I'm Rune. See you next chapter.